testimony. He'll make a short statement. We will not be taking questions. This is also Michael Bowe of the Caswitz Law Firm.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mark Kasowitz, President Trump's personal lawyer. Contrary to numerous false press accounts leading up to today's hearing, Mr. Comey has now finally confirmed publicly what he repeatedly told President Trump privately. That is, that the president was not under investigation as part of any probe into Russian interference. The president, Mr. Comey also admitted that there is no evidence that a single vote changed as a result of any Russian interference. Mr. Comey's testimony also makes clear that the president never sought to impede the investigation into attempted Russian interference in the 2016 election. And in fact, according to Mr. Comey, the president told Mr. Comey, quote, "It would be good to find out," close quote, in that investigation if there was, quote, "some satellite associates of his who did something wrong," close quote. And he, President Trump, did not exclude anyone from that statement. Consistent with that statement, the president never, in form or substance, directed or suggested that Mr. Comey stop investigating anyone, including the president never suggested that Mr. Comey, quote, "let Flynn go," close quote. As the president publicly stated the next day, he did say to Mr. Comey, quote, "General Flynn is a good guy. He has been through a lot," close quote. And also, quote, "asked how General Flynn is doing," close quote. Admiral Rogers testified today that the president never, quote, "directed him to do anything illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate," close quote, and never, quote, "pressured him to do so," close quote. Director Coates said the same thing. The president likewise never pressured Mr. Comey. The president also never told Mr. Comey, quote, "I need loyalty. I expect loyalty," close quote. He never said it in form, and he never said it in substance. Of course, the office of the president is entitled to expect loyalty from those who are serving the administration. And from before this president took office to this day, it is overwhelmingly clear that there have been and continue to be those in government who are actively attempting to undermine this administration with selective and illegal leaks of classified information and privileged communications. Mr. Comey has now admitted that he is one of these leakers. Today, Mr. Comey admitted that he unilaterally and surreptitiously made unauthorized disclosures to the press of privileged communications with the president. The leaks of this privileged information began no later than March 2017, when friends of Mr. Comey have stated that he disclosed to them the conversations that he had with the president during their January 27th, 2017 dinner and February 14th, 2017 White House meeting. Today, Mr. Comey admitted that he leaked to friends of his purported memos of those privileged communications, one of which he testified was classified. Mr. Comey also testified that immediately after he was terminated, he authorized his friends to leak the contents of those memos to the press in order to, in Mr. Comey's words, quote, "prompt the appointment of a special counsel," close quote. Although Mr. Comey testified that he only leaked the memos in response to a tweet, the public record reveals that the New York Times was quoting from those memos the day before the referenced tweet, which belies Mr. Comey's excuse for this unauthorized disclosure of privileged information and appears to be entirely retaliatory. We will leave it to the appropriate authorities to determine whether these leaks should be investigated along with all the others that are being investigated. In sum, it is now established that the president was not being investigated for colluding with or attempting to obstruct any investigation. As the committee pointed out today, these important facts for the country to know are virtually the only facts that have not been leaked during the course of these events. As he said yesterday, the president feels completely vindicated and is eager to continue moving forward with his agenda, with the business of this country, and with this public cloud removed. Thank you.
Mr. Counsel, why should Mueller interview the president? Why should the president record over Mr. Comey?
Tens of millions of middle-class families across America still bear the scars of that Great Recession that was caused by the very same policies that are contained in this bill that the Republicans are putting on the floor today. In response to what happened then, the Democratic Congress vowed that Main Street taxpayers would be protected and never again pay the price for Wall Street's recklessness, that predatory lenders and profiteers that abused America's families far too long would no longer prevail. With Dodd-Frank, Democrats enacted the strongest Wall Street consumer financial protections in history, critical reforms to protect hardworking Americans and to insist on accountability from Wall Street. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that the law created, has returned nearly, remember these two figures, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has returned nearly $12 billion to 29 million Americans, many of them seniors or service members. But with this bill, Republicans will undo the safeguards, eviscerate the Consumer Bureau, take our country back to the days of massive taxpayer bailouts of these financial institutions. Our Republican colleagues have named this dreadful and dangerous legislation the Choice Act. Anytime you see their name, turn it upside down, because it is the wrong Choice Act. Instead of protecting consumers, Republicans choose to help those who cheated the consumers. Instead of protecting seniors, Republicans choose to help those who prey on their retirement savings by overturning the fiduciary rule. It wasn't even part of the Dodd-Frank, but they've gone even further. Instead of protecting men and women in uniform, Republicans choose to help those who take advantage of their families while our heroes are defending our freedom on the battlefield. Instead of advancing an economy that works for everyone, working people with a bill for the bailout when it goes wrong. Those are not the choices of the American people. They are wrong choices, but they are the choices of the Republican Party that puts Wall Street first. Now it is my honor to yield to our distinguished ranking member, fighter for the American consumer, taxpayer, and for stability in our financial institutions, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California.
Thank you, Leader Pelosi, not only for this press conference today, but for the leadership that you have demonstrated for our caucus, but particularly for the work that we do on financial services. The Wrong Choice Act is an immensely bad bill that would bring harm to consumers, investors, and our whole economy. It must be stopped. The bill is part of a shameless effort by congressional Republicans and Donald Trump to help out Wall Street. Let's be clear. While they have come claiming they are advocating for small banks, they are indeed advocating for the biggest banks in America. Last year, banks large and small posted record profits. The Wrong Choice Act would dismantle the key reforms we put in place in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, and it would destroy the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The Consumer Bureau is the only agency dedicated to protecting consumers in the financial marketplace. Since its creation, Consumer Bureau has returned, as the leader said, nearly $12 billion to 29 million American consumers harmed by predatory and illegal financial practices. This bill would put a stop to that good work on behalf of hardworking Americans, undo the most important parts of Wall Street reform, and pave the way back to the financial crisis. We all remember how devastating that crisis was. 11 million people lost their homes. $13 trillion in wealth was lost, and the unemployment rate rose to 10%. Our economy was brought to its knees. This bill would result in the same sort of economic ruin and even worse. That's why Democrats are unified against the Wrong Choice Act. We're standing up for Main Street and fighting to protect our economy. So I thank you, and it is my delight and pleasure to bring to the podium our distinguished whip, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Waters, who's done such a great job at protecting our consumers and our financial stability. Thank you, Leader Pelosi. This is the wrong choice, but it is the usual choice that we see our Republican friends making. This has been 5 months of reducing protections for our consumers, reducing protections for our environment, reducing protections for the health care of our people, a string of bills that have been passed, this being just the most immediate one, which reduces protecting Americans from those who would prey on them, who would undermine their fiscal security, their family's security, their health security. Like the Affordable Care Act, most of the people proposing this legislation opposed Dodd-Frank, perhaps all. They oppose protecting the people from financial institutions that would prey on them and put them at risk. And so now they come with this Trojan horse, if you will, pretending that somehow it will make protections better, when in fact, as the ranking member has pointed out, as the leader pointed out, it will undermine and eliminate the protections that the American people must have, and frankly, that our financial institutions must have, so that they can remain stable and serving the American people. I'm pleased to join in opposing this wrong choice for the American people. We're going to vote on this pretty soon. We're going to vote overwhelmingly against it. It may or may not pass, but I am sure that it will not pass the United States Senate because it is the wrong choice. I now want to yield to one of the three co-chairs of our policy committee, Mr. David Cicilline of Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. I want to begin by thanking Leader Pelosi and Whip Hoyer for their strong leadership on this very important issue, and thank our ranking member, Maxine Waters, for her relentless opposition to this awful piece of legislation, and also acknowledge the vice ranking member of the committee, Mr. Kildee, for his strong leadership. This is really a horrible thing that the Republicans are doing today. This piece of legislation will devastate the ability of regulators to protect consumers from Wall Street exploitation and to protect our economy from the risky financial behavior of too big to fail Wall Street mega banks. With their votes today, the Republicans are giving Wall Street special interests a big, wet kiss. It's incredible how many important consumer protections will be gutted under this bill, but I'd like to focus on the impact that this vote will have on those who serve in our military. I'm from Rhode Island, which is home to more than 70,000 veterans, 70,000 heroes who have served and sacrificed for our country. The Wrong Choice Act, which is really what it is an insult to the men and women who have served our country and who are serving today. And if it becomes law, it will put the financial security of our service members at serious risk. Since 2010, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has taken at least a dozen major actions to protect service members and their families. In 2016, the CFPB fined Navy Federal Credit Union $28 million for illegal debt collection tactics that targeted service members. In 2013, the CFPB compelled Cash America, a high-cost, small-dollar lender, to pay up to $14 million in restitution and a $5 million penalty after it was shown that they robo-signed court documents and charged service members higher interest rates than they were legally allowed to do. And just 2 months ago, the CFPB sanctioned Security National Automotive Acceptance Company. This was an auto lending company that harassed and preyed on service members. They threatened that they'd contact commanding officers about debts that service members incurred, and they flat out lied to them about what their financial obligations were. I don't know what kind of company decides they're going to prey on our men and women in uniform. This is really a special level of greed. But these predatory companies and others like them have been held accountable because of the CFPB. But if Republicans get their way, our brave men and women in uniform are going to be exposed to significant risks and lose a critical resource to protect their financial security. We cannot allow Donald Trump and the Republicans to do this to our veterans and to the men and women who are currently serving. We owe those who serve our country a tremendous debt of gratitude, and we can never fully repay that. And while Republicans may force this through the House today, I know that this bill will not become law without a fight, and I know that all of us are going to keep fighting. The big banks know that the Republicans are on their side, but Democrats are standing on the side of honest, hardworking families all across this country, and we will keep fighting on their behalf. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce the Vice Ranking Member of the Financial Services Committee, Congressman Kildee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cicilline, and for our leader, Ms. Pelosi, Mr. Hoyer, and Maxine Waters, with whom I've worked on this issue. We stand united as a caucus against this bill. Just because the President of the United States is completely ignorant of American history does not mean that Congress should choose to be ignorant of recent American history. This legislation takes us right back to the very conditions that precipitated and actually caused the greatest financial collapse of my lifetime. Millions of people lost their homes. Families lost everything that they've worked for. And the Republicans in this Congress want to take us right back to that condition in order to support financial interests that support them. It's unconscionable. What would this legislation do? Not only return us to those days, but take away the authority of the agency that was intended to be an independent agency to support American consumers, to go to bat for American consumers against these predatory institutions. And rather than have the consumer as that client, as the constituent for that office, this legislation would put the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in a position where it had to answer to one person and one person only, Donald Trump, who could fire the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau if he didn't like something that he did. Does that sound familiar? This legislation also would eliminate the orderly liquidation authority that would prevent the failure of an institution from wrecking our economy and basically throw us to the wind. Bankruptcy or bailout is the only thing that would be left, not an orderly process intended to protect us from the collapse of a financial institution. It would take away the Volcker rule, which would basically say big financial institutions can gamble for their own benefit using depositors' money with the backing of the federal government. They privatize their profits and they socialize all the losses. This is bad for the American consumer. It ought to be rejected by every member of Congress. Every Democrat on our committee stood strong on this. This is a terrible piece of legislation. We ought to turn it back. It's bad for the American consumer. It's bad for the American economy. It's only good for the people at the very top, and we cannot allow this to move forward. And with that, I'll yield back to, I think, the most effective political leader in the history of our country, Ms. Pelosi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Lots of questions.
John Helpman, American Banker. Both the Republicans who have been advancing this bill on the House floor today and Democrats opposing it have said that they want to rein in Wall Street. They want to prevent the kinds of bailouts and the kinds of issues that affected us in the crisis. And yet there seems to be very divergent views on how to achieve that goal. How do you account for that?
Well, I'm going to yield to our distinguished ranking member and her vice ranking member because they're on the committee. But to say is that the facts are very clear. What they are doing is, again, as Mr. Kildee said, they're privatizing the gain and nationalizing the risk. Once again, they are making the taxpayer take the systemic risk of their activities, which may or may not be responsible, in fact, may be reckless. So the bill speaks for itself. This bill unleashes, once again, the opportunity for them to act in a way that is not in the interest of consumers, not in the interest of investors, certainly not in the interest of taxpayers. One only need read the bill to see what this does, not to rein in Wall Street, but to unleash Wall Street. And with that, I'll yield to the distinguished ranking member.
Well, you have heard over and over again that the centerpiece of Dodd-Frank reform is being attacked by this bill. That is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. If you can remember the history of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, you can recall the difficulty that Mr. Cordray had just being appointed and everything that they did to try and stop him because they hate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And they would claim that it's because of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that community banks and other businesses are somehow being disadvantaged. It's not true. You heard about the number of people who have been supported because of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the fines that have been rendered, and how we have an advocate for the first time in maybe history for consumers. Prior to Dodd-Frank reform, nobody spoke for them. Our oversight agencies that were supposed to be concerned about safety and security and all of that, they just plain forgot about them. The complaints come in. Mr. Cordray is one of the best leaders, directors of any agency that you could ever find. He's tough, he's strong, he put together a massive agency in a relatively short period of time. He's making it work. And every time they have entered, into any kind of little problems, he's worked hard to straighten them out. And he engages those in business who come to him who want to talk about his rules and the way that he's doing that. But in addition to that, don't forget 2008, where we had all of this predatory lending with exotic products, loans that reset in 6 months or a year, no documentation loans, liar loans, all of that, where innocent people signed on the dotted line hoping that they could get a mortgage because they wanted the American dream. They wanted to buy a house. And then they discovered that somehow they had signed on to a contract that the interest rates were going to increase. Mind you, they would not be making any more money when the interest rates increased than they were making when they took out the loan. So what happened? Foreclosures all over this country. Some communities were absolutely devastated. And so Dodd-Frank reform dealt with all of that. We dealt not only with the exotic loans and stopping those kinds of practices. Don't forget about derivatives. We made them transparent. Don't forget about the Volcker rule. We absolutely stopped the practice of taking in the client's money, the average American savings, and then using them to bet in trading. And so this is serious. And we know that the big banks don't abide by any oversight that they think will not allow them to do whatever it is they want to do. Because historically, they've been in charge. They've been able to do whatever they've wanted to do. Dodd-Frank stops that. And we take a look at these big banks and we say, you've got to present these living wills so we will know how you are organized and how you operate. And further, we say there is an orderly resolution authority, because if we see that you're in trouble, we're going to break you up in certain ways. We're going to reduce your size. We're going to take away certain operations. So Dodd-Frank reforms is comprehensive. It's targeted to deal with the problems that caused us to be in the situation we were in 2008, and this would undo all of that. That's what it's all about.
Perhaps they don't know much about what the bill does, as you can tell, our ranking member does.
Oh, so it sounds like that reining in Wall Street rhetoric, you don't feel like is really sincere on the part of
It's not only insincere, it's not true.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to make. Their talking points sound great until you read the legislation. And what you see is that this is, at its face, it's an anti-consumer piece of legislation. It's intended to go back in time to the point where the banks were in charge and the consumer was on their own. And not only do they restore that environment, but they take the one institution that was created as a part of Dodd-Frank that is supposed to stand up for those consumers and ties the hands of that very institution. Just as an example, takes away the authority of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to bring an action for unfair, deceptive practices under UDAP. Takes away the authority to make those cases. Why? Why would they do that? What's the logic? How does that do anything to grow the economy? All it does is put those big institutions in a position to prey upon those consumers. It does not do anything but that. And so, one of the things you learn is you got to look at what the legislation actually says and not what the chair of the committee says or what the speaker says about it. Because unfortunately, what they say doesn't become legislation. What's written down does. And it's just a terrible piece of legislation.
I just wonder what you learned from the James Comey.
Well, I'm happy to answer that, but let's stay with this subject for now. Yes, sir.
Some Democrats say there's elements of the bill that they would like to support if it wasn't packaged with some of the poison pills that you think are in there. What ideas are Democrats willing to get behind to improve financial regulation?
Well, I think what you're referring to is a lot of talk about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for example, where there has been a lot of discussion about whether it should be a commission rather than an individual director, and whether or not they should go before the Appropriations Committee instead of being funded in the way that they are from the feds. And so when we have had the opportunity to point out why they would like to do it that way, because simply they would like to cripple the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau with a commission that would have majority Republicans at the time that Republicans are in charge, or they can stop it in the Appropriations Committee when they are in charge, as they are now. When we explain that and walk through that, then our members increasingly began to understand. And don't forget that many of the issues that we're dealing with are very complicated issues, and that most of our members are focused on the committees where they work. If you're over in Health and Human Services or whatever you're doing, you really don't know the intricacies of what's happening in financial services. And sometimes it takes a while for us to really unveil and give transparency to what is going on. So we feel very comfortable, and we know that we're going to have the support of all of our members for the most part today on the floor. And so we're not worried that somehow Democrats are feeling that they're not being considered for wanting to support this bad bill. That's really not the case.
I don't know, maybe you have an example that you would like to use about a proposal that some Democrats may have. We always subject every bill that we pass in the Congress to scrutiny, especially over time, as to how its implementation can be improved. So if there's any discussion, for example, at what the size of a bank is before it becomes a systemic risk to the taxpayer, then let's discuss what that number might be. But I really don't know of any good thing that is in this bill. And I'll just go one step further and talk about the fiduciary rule, which isn't even part of Dodd-Frank. But not that they didn't make matters worse enough, they even made matters worse by going to the fiduciary rule, which protects the investor, which was a compromise regulation that the Secretary of Labor listened to everyone's concerns in the private sector and came up with something that works. But that wasn't good enough for some of our friends on the other side of the aisle, that we would have a regulation that says that a financial advisor should act in the interest of the investor. I mean, really.
If I could piggyback on that, this legislation is a smorgasbord of extreme ideological positions taken by the chairman of the committee. Just for example, one of the things it does is tie the hands of the Federal Reserve in making monetary policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. To tie the hands, and just think about the effect that the Federal Reserve has had in the last decade in righting the ship. And what they would do would be apply some formulaic system that has not been tested to decisions made by the thoughtful members of that Federal Reserve Board. I mean, this is an ideological document. It's a gift-wrapped, hard-right present that Jeb Hensarling is delivering to his constituency, and it shouldn't be seen as anything other than that.
Over here. 1, 2, and then we'll go to your question. Because we have to go to the floor. We have work to do on the floor.
I'll try to make this quick. And there's been some talk in the Senate about some sort of compromise bill or bipartisan package that relieves some regulations on small banks. The question there being, where is the line drawn at what is a small bank and what is a systemically important bank? Do you have a number in mind for that, or are there any principles that you'll be looking at when it comes to figuring out what is actually relief for small banks and what is relief for banks you would not consider small?
Well, that's an ongoing discussion, but I think your statement points to what has been said earlier. This bill in its present form is not going to pass the Senate. So there's an attempt, as we know, to chop it up and take one thing at a time. But the cumulative effect on the investor, on the taxpayer, on the consumer will be the same, and it's not good. In terms of what I said that myself, that where does a bank become a systemic, what is the size of a bank that makes it a systemic risk? That's a subject for discussion. It's not something that we talk about here at a press conference. Yeah. You had a question?
Yes. There's been some talk.
Just jump in.
There's been some talk about Republicans kind of peeling off some of the elements of the Choice Act and having individual votes, and you've mentioned a lot of issues. Do you think you would stand a better chance at either defeating or preventing Republicans from bringing up individual legislation if they went forward with that strategy on any of these issues that you mentioned?
They've already employed that strategy. We have voted time and time again on various aspects of this bad choice bill. And so they have taken shots with individual pieces. And of course, this is the signature piece from Mr. Henselin, where he dumps it all into one bad choice bill. But I grant you that if you take a look at what we have worked on for months, you will find that we have voted on various pieces of it.
Yeah, and the CRAs had some of that. Yes, ma'am. And my colleagues, I don't know if you would be here for Comey.
Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. What was your question?
I wondered what you learned from the James Comey hearing today, and then specifically some of your members are like calling for impeachment, wanting to start writing articles of impeachment for President Trump. And previously you said that kind of adds to Washington chaos. So I wondered about your reaction.
No, I didn't say it adds to Washington chaos. I didn't say that. So forgive me. I didn't say that. I don't know if somebody said that, but I did not say that. What I did say is that what we want are the facts. We know the law. We want the facts. And why are the Republicans in Congress standing in the way of the American people finding out the truth of what the Russians have politically, personally, or financially on President Donald Trump? And when we see the facts, then you can make a determination of how that how the facts compare to the law or contrast. So you asked, what did I learn today? Well, I think we saw confirmation in Director Comey's resolute testimony detailing the frightening reality of President Trump's pattern of contempt for justice, his pattern of concerted and inexcusable efforts to shut down the FBI's investigation of his cronies' ties to Russia, and all of that, I think, disgraces the office of president. The president may not realize that, but maybe I have more respect for the office of president than he does. Instead of protecting our democracy from Putin, President Trump worked relentlessly to obstruct the investigation of Michael Flynn and his campaign's possible collusion with Russia. Nothing less than the integrity and security of our democracy is at stake. So we have an investigation within the Justice Department. We all have a high degree of respect for Mr. Mueller. But that is within the Justice Department reporting to Trump appointees. We have high regard for the fact that Congress can conduct an investigation in the Intelligence Committee, in the House and in the Senate. But that's inside the Congress, inside a Republican Congress. What we need is an outside independent commission. It's clear that we would. That commission would be more about how do we stop the undermining of our own democracy by a foreign power, which is an adversary. Russia is our adversary. Stop them, see what they did, which is irrefutable. They hacked, they leaked, in some cases they altered, and they had an impact on our election. We cannot let that happen again, and they're doing it in the rest of the world to undermine democracies. So I salute Director Comey for his courage, thank him for sharing the facts in a very, I think, straightforward way, and look forward to where we go from here. My colleagues, did you want to say anything about that? No? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
See you.